Smart Fares. See, Smart Fares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use Smart Fares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our Smart Fares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call Smart Fares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County. We welcome you back on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. We are absolutely astounded that we had an actual 2 days of less than 110 degree heat, so that was wonderful. We are sitting here with the gentleman who is going to be interviewed by us today, Mr. Henry Teich. I'm going to allow him to explain himself a little bit. First, I want to go over the topic for today's show. For those of you listening, you might not see the stuff that's coming up on the screen. That's okay. It's just as important to listen. We have a very important topic for today that I don't think a lot of people, let alone a lot of generational Zers are going to understand, but that's okay. We're going to give our guests some time. Mr. Henry Teich is a good friend of mine, and we have a Thursday morning breakfast group that we go to, and we had the fortune of having him present this morning. And a very intellectual man, very knowledgeable about what he discusses. He has a lot of political background experience. And I'm just going to go briefly over a little bit about him. He had actually had a Texas state legislature. He was a candidate for the Texas House of Representatives. And to my knowledge, was also a chairman for the Johnson County Republican Party, if I'm correct, sir.
Yes.
And today he's going to be discussing a story. Now, when we have this show, we don't really discuss a lot of stories. It's mostly current events, the happenings in the world. And this story has a lot of historical and political significance. The story of Rhodesia, a country that no longer exists in South Africa. It was above Mozambique. Mozambique kind of covered it to the south and to the east, and it was right above South Africa. It was at one point the richest, the second richest country, and had the highest literacy rate, the highest educational rate in all of Africa, believe it or not, and had gained its independence in about 1964 from the country of Great Britain, or as it was known still as the British Empire at that point. So we had a book here that kind of inspired the discussion for today. It's called The Great Betrayal by Ian Smith, Memoirs of Africa's Most Controversial Leader. He was a very traditionalist to some on the opposition, as would be the polite way to put it, and a very great leader to those who knew him from the National Front in Rhodesia. So I'm going to pass it over to Mick here. Mick's going to introduce us a little bit to Rhodesia, the history of it, and then we'll have a great privilege to introduce Mr. Teich.
So Rhodesia was a jewel of civilization on the African continent. Like Jacob was saying, it was just leftover of the British Empire as part of the British Commonwealth. It was extremely wealthy because of its mineral rights. And in the 60s, it found itself under siege on all sides by communism. The entire Eastern Bloc, the Soviets, threw themselves behind the communist revolution. Their neighbors were attacking them. They had terrorist cells within their own nation. And out of desperation, Rhodesia turned to America and the United Kingdom to help it. And to say we abandoned them would be an understatement. We actively took part in their dismembering.
And that is to the listeners and the viewers, that is actually where the title of Ian Smith's book came from. The Great Betrayal was the betrayal of the United States and the people of Great Britain to neglect helping the people of Rhodesia, which probably had a lot more in common with us than the war in Vietnam did.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry to interject, but one question that Mick and I are kind of wanting to get by the end of this is we want to allow the viewers and the listeners to question whether the Vietnam War was actually a war for freedom in Vietnam, or if it was a military-industrial complex distraction from the issue in Rhodesia, as we know might have been a more important target.
On the note of Vietnam, Rhodesia actually helped us in Vietnam, and when they needed help, we sent them nothing. And this is what has caused the current issue in South Africa, where this war is still very much playing out.
And we're still seeing the effects of the Boer War in South Africa. So without further ado, we're going to pass over to Mr. Henry Teich. Tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, how you came into politics, and what your credit is to you.
Well, I started my political endeavors in the Barry Goldwater era. I studied politics. My history was my favorite subject in high school and college, even though that's not where I endeavored my studies. I studied engineering at Weatherford College and went on to UTA. And I can remember when the Vietnam War ended, engineers were a dime a dozen, so I decided to go into education. At that time, I went to Tarleton State University and finished my degree in education, even though I was junior level in engineering. So I'm heavy engineering. I have an Associate of Arts degree in engineering, and I have Bachelor of Science in Education and Industrial Arts. And so I came out of Weatherford College to be a teacher. I also am a farmer. I paid my way in school by working as a farmer, and I actually have been farming since 1974. So in 1977, I had the opportunity and needed to make the money. I had bought some land and I'd gotten behind the proverbial 8 ball in agriculture. So I had a chance to go to the Middle East and work in the oil patch. And at the same time, there was a air traffic control strike at that time. And I flew from here to New York, Kennedy. And at that time, got on a plane. Actually, the plane that I was supposed to be on was a British Airways, but they had to move me to Air Sabina. And I'm sitting on that plane, wanting to see the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. So I was on a 747 in front of the wing. And a young woman walks up and asks if she could sit by me. And this plane was going to be packed because we were there weren't that many flights, and they'd broken up. We were going as a group, but we've been broken up. And so at that time, I said, well, ma'am, you can sit anywhere you want. And at that time, she said, are you from Texas? And I said, yes, ma'am, I'm from Texas. And the next thing she said was, do you know JR? Well, ironically enough, I knew his brother. I knew.
And we're just gonna, if you could move the mic up a little bit, it'd make it easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The truth of the matter is that I knew Mary Martin's other son, and I'm trying to think of JR's name, his real name. But anyway, that experience just started this whole conversation. And we had this aura, Texans had this aura of being invincible worldwide. We were leaders in oil. We were leaders. And ironically, this young lady had studied Texas. And she asked me about the Texas Rangers. And she made the statement, she said, did you know that Adolf Hitler was afraid of that they might send the Texas Rangers in World War II? And anyway, I found out, Anne was her name. I found out that she was from Rhodesia. And I found out she was on a tour of the colonies, the British colonies. And she was going back home. She had graduated from a school in a college or a university in Europe. And she knew a lot about politics. And she knew she was going home to help her father. And
this was after the war, the Bush War had started, or is this kind of before?
This would be 1977, so it'd be before the war that took place in the Middle East.
So right after Vietnam.
Yeah, right after Vietnam, right after Jimmy Carter was president, and so we immediately bonded because of the fact that she was an agriculturalist background and I was too. And there were a lot of similarities in as far as our interests. And she immediately started telling me about Rhodesia. And she said, well, Father will, and she always referred to her father as Father. And Father will have a Land Rover at Johannesburg waiting when I get there, pick me up, and then we'll travel to Rhodesia by road. And she said, we'll have 2 assault weapons mounted on over the transmission hump in the vehicle. And she said, we might be attacked by rebels on the way into the country. And the war had already started to infiltrate South Africa too. Nelson Mandela, I think at that time had already gone to prison. But anyway, she said, as soon as we enter Rhodesia, we'll be under threat of attack. And she told me that the station, the concession that her father had, they had a berm around the house, but the people that worked with them were under constant attack, and the rebels were using machetes. That was the method of killing farmers, and the goal was to kill the Boers, kill the farmers. That still goes on today.
Can I interject real quick?
Yes.
This part of the world is often known for having really bad famines.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if those two things are connected.
Well, no. Rhodesia was the Iowa of Africa, is what Anne said. She said Rhodesia has minerals, it has oil, diamonds,
Okay,
all of those things, but it also has one of the better climates in Africa. And she told me that the rebel communists were invading from Mozambique to the east, and the war was escalating, and women were involved in this war too, and there were women that were killed in this endeavor. I wonder if Anne suffered that fate. I've always wondered that.
And we had actually, and I know, Henry, you have told me this story many times, and it never gets tiring, because it's something that, when we're talking about communism, and I'm going to leave the cliffhanger for you about, everything that Anne had told you about the communist invasion. But when we talk about these very pressing matters of the past, they often repeat themselves. And when we look at the United States, places like Britain, where we're already having this ideological divide between those that are pro-Republican democracy and those that are pro-communist, the two cannot coexist in the same government. You can't have a free society and a communist government, and you can't have a communist society and a free government, unless we're talking about the United States, where this is really the only country where it has allowed us to coexist in a peaceful way.
Correct.
But when we're talking about Rhodesia, and the thing that you said the multiple times that stuck with me was Rhodesia was such a small country, and the diversity there was 10-1 of what it could be here in the United States. And the amount of people that were funded by the communists that were funneled through the border is kind of what we're seeing with the Chinese nationals that are undocumented and coming over the southern border.
The similarities are striking, that we have almost exactly the idea of burn it down to build it again.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, extreme communism has to deconstruct everything first. That's right. When the Soviets took over former Russian Empire, they took apart the Orthodox Church. They literally burned down the old neighborhoods, the old churches.
The Romanov house was burned down.
Literally anything that could be a reminder of the past had to go. They had to rebuild from the ground up, the idea of the new Soviet man.
Yeah, and again, along those same lines, the church had to go. The church had to go. The family had to go. And she was talking about those things, the common things with us that we shared, and she was trying. She's basically pleading for help, just like the whole country was, and she was telling how much of the strides that they had made, how the economy in Rhodesia was good. Black people were excelling at the time,
and they'd had the highest passing rate of minorities to any other country in the West almost at that time. The highest literacy rate, the highest literacy rate when it came to mathematics, for politics, for civil engagement as a whole was very direct part of the way that Rhodesia's government operated.
It was the best nation in Africa.
Yeah, the Pearl of Africa.
Yeah, is that what it was called?
Yeah, and she considered herself an Africano. She was born in Rhodesia, and she had this loyalty, almost like the same kind of loyalty that Texans have to Texas.
Yeah.
The other thing that I got out of Anne, that was this idea that she was willing to risk it all herself, and those people were willing to risk it all.
And she had she had lived in the United States for a brief period, right?
Yeah, she had been in the United States. She had been in Australia. She had gone into the past British colonies, And I think she was British. She was probably Dutch British, between the two.
Anglo-Boer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anglo-Boer.
So she was willing to give up a good education, a very comfortable life in the United States to go back and fight for what the Rhodesians saw as freedom and righteousness.
Exactly. One of the things that she said that got me, and I want to make sure everybody hears this one thing. She said, she trying to get this help, and she said, I told her, I said, well, Ann, don't you think it'd be better if you would come to the United States or Texas? And she said, you don't understand. It's coming to you too. This is a worldwide effort, and they're just stepping stones along the way. And so the invasion, the breakdown of the border, the breakdown of family values, the breakdown of society. Later on, I went hunting in South Africa, and the houses that I saw, a common thread was the houses were gutted, the ones that the rebels had taken over. All of the furniture was taken out, and they used kind of a Haydite block wall, but the buildings would be burned. All this furniture would be burned. And the other thing that just overwhelmed me was the fact that they had black people helping them too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, by that, they had loyal people in this fight. And after Rhodesia went down and became Zimbabwe, they destroyed the currency completely. Now, you got to remember, this is a rich country. When I was in Africa, I got a hold of a $1 trillion Zimbabwe note.
I'm guessing it wasn't worth a whole lot.
I paid $20 for it, but it was actually worthless.
Yeah.
They actually went as far as to print a $100 trillion.
That was sort everything out, right?
Yeah.
So they had high inflation. They had a breakdown of moral family values.
The invasion over their border.
Yeah, the border. Yeah. So yeah, I'm seeing some similarities here. Would you agree with that?
Yes, the similarities. They carry on same. The communists have a plan. Jacob, you showed me a book that you have of the goals of the communists, and they just one by one parallel.
To those wanting to reference the book, it's called The Naked Communists by W. Leon Skousen, I believe it is, or Skousen, something like that. One of them, their goals predominantly was not only to get rid of the House Un-Americans Activities Committee, but to also discredit and eventually abolish the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So we have to ask ourselves, we are seeing a lot of parallels when it comes to Rhodesia and the United States. And there is no doubt that when Henry had told me the line that Ann had told him, you don't understand, it's coming for you, it'll happen to you too, was something very, very interesting. And it's something that sticks with you. And it's something that stuck with me when Henry, you had first told me this story. I want to reference page 140 of The Great Betrayal, where Mr. Smith is basically talking about the Marxist Leninists, and he said they were putting into effect their psychological tactics in which they had been well drilled. They were telling the locals their plan was to take away all good things from the white people and hand them over to the other groups. And he had basically gone through this entire racial curriculum is what was being fed to the Rhodesians, be it propaganda from the Communist Party, and those that had come across the border were being fed this narrative that they would be liberated by the communists. And, we don't have to mention that Mozambique and Zambia and all of these other countries surrounding at the time were all communists.
I want to mention, too, all these nation states today are failed states.
Yeah.
Famine is the number one killer in this region. They have horrible currencies, economies. I mean, we just heard it here. They're printing $1 trillion deals to try to deal with inflation.
Yeah. Another thing, there's been a slight, the communist dictator died, And
Is this Mugabe?
yeah,
Okay.
he died. And the next leader invited white farmers to come back. And some of these people did when I were still alive. And in South Africa, I visited with a gentleman who used to be a farmer there, but then he had a concession for hunting at that time, and he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't leave. And I'm asking him, I said, "Do you think that you'll get to keep this?" He said, "No, I don't." He said, "But I love it here." And it reminded me the terrain, the country reminded me of South Texas. And it's a beautiful place. I mean, to be honest with you, there's a lot of desert toward the west, further west you go. But in that part of the country, it's a beautiful place.
So they had the same love of their colony that we as Americans, especially Texas, have for ours.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you had discussed the infiltration of communism, the invasion. I think it's imperative for the viewers and the listeners to know that China had actually backed the Soviet Union, and they were actually in competition over who would get Rhodesia, who would influence the country that came after them more, in this case, Zimbabwe. When we're looking at page 140, Mr. Smith, Prime Minister Smith, says, a game ranger passing through the area noticed an unusual boot print on the ground. From his description, was soon identified as being of Chinese origin. And so they had actually found 100 terrorists hidden in this bunker with weapons and equipment from both the Soviet Union and from communist China. And so when we have 172,000 Chinese nationals, military age individuals coming across the southern border, and we have China and Chinese firms buying up land in the United States, one can't help but wonder if we are subliminally being disposed to the same communist infiltration, the same Chinese invasion, just right under the nose of the American public.
I agree totally with your précis of what's going on there. And paralleling that, there were three quote freedom fighters that were killed that were actually gun runners in this deal, and that they got Sweden to turn against Rhodesia or Zimbabwe at that time. But just recently, the cartels have started sending people across the border that are armed, and to protect their routes and everything. And the state of Texas, is being sued right now for trying to protect the border,
putting up the floating barriers on the Brazos.
I actually
Rio Grande.
I served on the border when I was in the Army, and it was a common sight to see cartel troops coming across in formations. They were better armed, better equipped than the United States Army.
So they were basically a paramilitary force.
No, military. They were better armed, better equipped, and I'm willing to bet better trained.
Well, they had plenty of money to get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, while our average soldier is in a moldy room and can't afford food.
Yeah.
So, Henry, if you will, tell the listeners basically what had stuck with you that Anna told you most. What what did you take away that you have remembered that conversation for the rest of your life?
Well, I remember leaving, getting out off of the plane, and Ann was leaving in front of me, and I'm thinking to myself, I said, I'm afraid you're going home to get killed. And but I remember what actually two statements that she made. She made the statement that it's coming to you, and the need to have plenty of dedicated fools to follow the opposition. The Communist Party, I can't remember the exact words that Lenin used, but in other words, he needed uneducated fools to follow him.
I think it was gullible revolutionaries, something along those lines.
Yeah. And basically, what happens is that this indoctrination process, they offer you they have to have a capitalist country to prey on.
Yeah.
Because the instant they get it done, they don't have the wherewithal to make it work. And by that, to make it work, to have a full economy that's producing jobs and a lifestyle. They're always cutting the pie up while we're making pie.
Yeah. You have to have something to take it away, in a sense.
Yes.
Property, money, the trust in the government, in this case, the FBI, other government organizations that you're basically creating distrust in. So stay with us. We're going to go back for a minute and a half commercial break. We'll be back with Henry Teich to discuss Rhodesia and Ann's story. Is communism coming to America? Right back.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Welcome back to Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. We're back on this wonderful Thursday talking to Henry Teich, and Mick is here contributing to the discussion as well. We want to thank our listeners, and we'd like to take a moment to say Joco Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas, and is live 24/7 on the TuneIn Radio Network. TuneInJoco.com is the place to find all of the best ways to listen and watch. The station app is also available for free on both Android and Apple devices. Simply search your store and check out our lineup and more at jococommunityradio.com. This episode more is brought to you by Next Level Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to your local Texas sales rep at 844-839-4245. That's 844-839-4245. Be sure to dress your arms and more at thetiffy.com. And we also do want to extend a hand to our local merchants and businessmen. If you or anybody you know is interested in sponsoring a nonpartisan show like this that educates the youth and the elders alike of this community to help us better our nation and indeed educate the world on the current challenges and the conspiracies facing our nation and those abroad, please think about considering donating to the show to keep us up. Well, it takes money to make this stuff go around, and it takes quite a bit, not as much as donating for a $50 a month membership to some of your larger groups that are more than likely run by hedge fund managers and others alike. So please consider donating locally so we can keep educating our youth, and we might be able to get different opportunities to have schools educated and tour the local community to help those in need of political intellect. So we're back with Henry Teich, who is discussing Anne's story, the threat of communism. It can happen to you. It's coming for you too. And I want to pass it over to Mick, who had a brief comment about something important of the context of this discussion.
So when the Russian Empire fell to the communists and all of the Slavic world, Eastern Europe, fell into the Soviet Union, they got rid of gun rights. They dismantled the somewhat okay but failing Russian economy to try to create a new Soviet economy, try to reindustrialize.
The command and control, essentially.
Force a industrial revolution that the Russians were not ready for. They got rid of all the farmers. In fact, they killed all the farmers. They got rid of the borders in between the separate Soviet states that the Russian Empire had, the Ukrainian province, the Belarusian province, so on. And their whole goal was to create a new Soviet man. And this is our talk about Rhodesia reminds me of this every step of the way, especially the part about killing farmers.
It's very interesting. We're seeing those sort of sentiments, those death threats evolve now into new political chaos in South Africa and Europe alike. And I'm going to pass over to Henry. He knows more than I do about what's currently going on in South Africa with the Boer War that is still continuing against the farmers, predominantly those of Anglo descent who had either escaped Rhodesia or have moved there since. But we're seeing the same thing in Denmark and other places like the Netherlands, where farmland is being stripped from farmers.
What's happening here in America, the Midwest, Texas, and I think some other southern states are being forced to dump eggs and dairy milk.
And the new socialist way of taking it, the new communist threat is these watershed claims that we will certainly have somebody on here to discuss it. Sid Miller was one of the ones championing against this, but the EPA coming out and claiming rights to family farms that have been here for 150 years in the state.
The yeoman farmers that Thomas Jefferson spoke about.
Yes, sir. And those people's farms are being taken away because they find one endangered species on it, and that's all it takes. And they have this new thing that they're doing. I don't remember how Sid Miller had put it. We should get the guy on here. He is very intelligent when it comes to these things. But the way that they're prospecting this land is by trail guide. And basically, and that's my term that I am using for it, since I don't remember what he had called it. But he says basically anything that you can see off to the side of whatever or wherever you find these endangered species is now federal land. And so I want to pass over to Henry to discuss what is currently going on in South Africa.
Well, Nelson Mandela was not, he was a communist, but he wasn't vicious enough. And this is a pattern that we see, like even in the Soviet Union. You were talking about what happened over there. Lenin died of a stroke, and they think that Stalin had something to do with that.
That's the theory.
That's basically the theory. And then his Lenin's right-hand man was Trotsky. He was the head of the anyone that watches Dr. Zhivago, the guy that rides around in the train, that's Trotsky. That's the part that he's playing. And Trotsky left over there and came to the United States and then went to Mexico. And he's kind of the father of Che Guevara and the communist revolution in Central and South America.
And he was assassinated by Stalin.
Yes. Anyone that wants to check that out, read Radical Son by David Horowitz. Radical Son did a great job because his mother and father were both communists, and they brought back the word to kill Trotsky. So what the parallel is, though, that they promise these grandiose lifestyle and dreams, but the truth of the matter is they're reinstating the same kind of society that we had under kings.
No, worse.
Yeah.
Worse.
Yeah, but the serf comes back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's tied to the land.
But, at least you could rise in the ranks under a king. At least you had property rights under a king.
Yeah.
You got to keep some of the fruit of your labor under a king.
Yeah. But and here's the next thing about this thing that we're talking about. In the Soviet Union, They finally wound up letting them have 2 or 3 acres behind the house to grow food for themselves. Ironically enough, a market sprang up, and it became a major underground market. These people were living off the small amount of land, and they didn't have the incentive to go out there and take care of that big block of land like they should, and they had no gain in it. So this system, this communist system, when it loses something to devour, it starts to fail.
It moves on to the next victim.
So it's a vicious parasite.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what happened in Southern Africa, Rhodesia. They actually asked farmers to come back, but now we have a new political movement coming on, and there we go back again to kill the farmer, kill the board, and the battle cry is destruction.
And there's a video going around on the internet, and we don't have it up right now. If you want to go watch it on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, it's still up, I believe, of a gentleman, a soon-to-be dictator, if we're not careful, that is going to rise up the ranks very quickly in South Africa.
His name's Ramaphosa, if I believe I'm pronouncing that right.
Something like that, I believe. We're seeing 40, 50, 60, 70,000 people fill stadiums and chanting this, that they are ready to kill farmers and essentially anybody that has any property in this area of the world.
So I have to be the devil's advocate here. If you kill your farmers, where the food is going to come from is kind of a mystery.
Yeah.
And back to the Soviet Union, what were they known for? Famines.
Famines, yes.
So
one of the great famines of the early 1900s was in the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And they literally, they took the wheat away from them that they had grown to sell.
And Henry, I do have a quick question for you. I think our viewers might be wondering, and if anybody wants to send any comments in, if anybody wants to ask Mr. Teich anything, if anybody wants to express their concerns, ask him a question, feel free to fill the comments in. We are here to discuss and advocate on behalf of the American public and educate them first and foremost. But is it legitimate, Mr. Teich, if we see these parallels, these new movements happening around the world for communist dictators to have the chance to rise into power? Are we, the United States, obligated? And I know a lot of people don't favor us being the world's police power. A lot of us would rather say that it's easier for us to sit back and take care of our own people. I was, and I am still on the side of, I am very much against what had happened in the Vietnam War. If anybody were to ask me, I think that we have a much greater threat, and that is the spread of communism. It is much easier for us and much more logical to contain it where it is and let it fail and allow the system of capitalism or these other beneficial systems to rise up and rebuild themselves in these fallen nations than it is for us to go fight an endless war that we know that we're not going to lose. So is it logical? What can the United States do to prevent or help these countries that are seeing communism on the rise?
Well, of course, if we had sent weapons to Rhodesia, that would have been overwhelming weapons. In other words, if they had modern aircraft and modern more modern equipment, they could have defended themselves a lot better. But we could have also isolated the countries that were enabling this, like Mozambique,
Zambia, and the communists surrounding them.
Yeah, we could have done a embargo on those because we were sending food aid to those people.
I wanted to say that I read a military report. The communist rebels, the people invading Rhodesia, wanted a 15-to-1 numerical advantage because that was the only way that they'd be able to fight the Rhodesians on equal footing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The Rhodesians were highly trained, well motivated. The whole thing. They just did not have the equipment.
Yeah.
And I think manpower had a lot to do with it. You know, when we're looking at such a small military, and we do have a CIA report of it, I don't think there was any more than 70,000 men that they were able to field at once. Not even a division or a brigade size amount of people. If we are having to look at this as a U.S. standpoint, if we have men in the Air Force and the Army, and we are trying to also keep crime low at home, more than likely Rhodesia was having to deploy troops to their own streets to take care of these gang members, these cartels, the communists that were invading Rhodesia.
A lot of British veterans.
It's a lot of commitment at once.
A lot of British military veterans. I think some American ones too actually went to Rhodesia on their own, and they tried to model the Rhodesian military, like the Special Air Service, the British Special Forces. They wanted the Rhodesians to be a small elite force because it was all they could muster.
Yeah. And Mr. Teich, if you don't mind sharing with the viewers a few more things that you remember about what struck you from the story about Rhodesia. What do you think is imperative for the young listeners to understand, knowing that our generation is more than likely going to be the victims of communist control? I had a conversation with my dad, matter of fact, earlier about the subject for today, and had a few family members discuss this with me. And I had told several of my family members that they are waiting on the older generations to die off, those that have the memory of the Soviet Union, those that have the memory of Rhodesia.
Exactly.
And they are waiting for our generation to come into power. And they are actively not only grooming us to be complicit with this, but to be normalized with communism.
Yeah.
So what takeaway from Ann's story is important, do you think, for our younger listeners?
Well, one of the goals of the communists is the propaganda machine, and they have a goal of taking over the educational system. And our teachers, which I was a certified teacher, I found that they were compromised because of the NEA. The NEA, the goals paralleled this socialist agenda. And
what is the NAA?
National Education Agency.
Okay, I figured. I just wanted to ask.
Yes, and they have literally been espousing this stuff, and to basically take away any connection with our history.
So it's from the top down.
It's from the top down now.
Okay.
And we're seeing that with the I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Confucius Institutes that are actually giving hundreds of millions of dollars to, hundreds of schools around the United States. We have some, matter of fact, in Texas. I think Highland Park was one of them that took money from the Chinese Communist Party through funneled agencies. I think a few universities, big name universities here in Texas, were being funded by the Confucius Institute as well, which, as we all know, are spreading communist Chinese propaganda to our school children.
Yeah, and George Soros is funding them right now. He funded a organization here in the state in the three major metropolitan areas: Houston, San Antonio, and I believe the other one was Austin. I believe he funded it to the tune of $750,000.
Good Lord!
I have to ask you. So it's coming from the top down. The Cultural Revolution here in America started what, the 60s, 60s,
about
70s?
with the free sex movement and
the baby boomer generation.
Well, yes, it started with the baby boom era, but the singular thing, the turning point, was when prayer was taken out of the school. Now, visualize for a minute. The Bible is the most popular book that's ever been printed.
Yeah,
and yet we can't study it in the public school. We can't study it in English. We can't. We can't.
But we can study books that allude to it or reference it.
So
from a literary standpoint, but we can't touch the religious material of it.
can I expand upon a thought here?
Yes.
So you've been saying you've been giving us a roadmap to communism, essentially, and I kind of went to the Soviet Union earlier. This new Soviet man, he has to have absolute loyalty to communism, to the party, to the state.
Yeah.
Well, if you want that, there's two other sources of loyalty in people's lives: their religion and their family.
Mm-hmm.
We've gotten rid of the family unit, in particular, we've gotten fathers out of the household through the divorce culture, and we took Bibles out of school, or religion out of school, out of society. So we have religion gone, we have fathers gone, or family. So that leaves just the state as far as who they'll have loyalty towards. Do you think that was intentional?
Yes, very intentional. And the toxins, they're saying that males are toxic now.
Yeah, toxic masculinity.
Yeah, and they're actually targeting, ironically enough, the cowboy.
Yeah.
As being the symbol of this toxicity. And I mean, John Wayne, the era that I grew up in, John Wayne was the symbol of being an American patriot. I remember the Green Berets. I remember the Sands of Iwo Jima.
Wonderful movie.
Yeah, wonderful movie. And these men, they symbolized. They gave us heroes to pattern our lives after, and that's the secret, I think, of having a strong country, is having an individual that values their history and values independence.
Do you believe that they're trying to break down the men of our nation so that there'd be less resistance if there was to become an armed revolution?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly.
You make the patriotic men just men, then you break them down even further, just make them boys.
It's the classic communist move of demoralization before threatening the public with armed revolution.
I asked that because in the Soviet Union they did a very similar thing.
Yes, that and this the pattern that we had recently when we had all the burning, like Portland and Washington D.C. and different cities around the country and everything. That is exactly the same pattern that happened in the Soviet Union, and they used the failure of the Russian army weakened the Tsar, and they saw the opportunity to move in and take over, and they did.
And we had the same thing here because our deep state entrenched bureaucracy more or less stole all the power from the president at the time, President Trump. So we had a weakened Tsar equivalent.
Yes, and who is the author of the modern era? Saul Alinsky.
Yeah,
Rules for Radicals.
And I do want to tag on to what you had said earlier, Henry, about the destruction of basically individuality in this country, the destruction of possible resistance to the Communist Manifesto as it stands. I do want to tell the public, if you are able to look at the way affirmative action, if you were to look at the way that all of these laws have been passed to so-called empower women, empower minorities, there is a common manifesto behind them. Number one, you are implying that somebody is worthless to succeed. It is impossible for them to succeed because of who God made them to be. Secondly, you are inherently saying that because an individual is worthless as they are, they have to rely on the federal government or a state government or a communist government for empowerment. So not only are we forcing the independence of individuals to go away because of the way they were created, but now we are putting dependency on a government. So this kind of gets into, you are only about as worthy as the federal government or whatever government you live under sees you. And so when we look at the so-called empowerment of minorities, the empowerment of women through the 60s and the 70s with the peace, the love movement that grew kind of into the gender manifestation movement we're seeing today, it really cannot help but make one wonder, why are we only valuable to the government, to political doctrines, because of what we are on the outside? Why are we only valuable to the government with the physical way that we were created? The one thing that makes capitalism, the one thing that makes Christianity stand out above the rest of the world, and this is just my personal view, is the consistent motion that we need to better ourselves. When we have the notion to, sure, I'm a woman, sure, I'm a minority, sure, I was born in an impoverished neighborhood, but you can rise out of this. You can better yourself if you put your nose to the ground and you work hard. I would much rather go to work for 40 hours a week and know that my muscles have gotten stronger, knowing that I have learned more, knowing that I have interacted with people, rather than sitting at home getting a universal basic income, or knowing that I have failed my country.
I have to interject. You're right, but not anymore, and that's intentional.
Yeah.
They have made it harder to succeed, harder to rise above in order for you to more easily succumb to Marxist ideology. That's why they're taxing people more.
Let me add one other thought here. This is an insect mentality.
Insect,
yes. If you look at an ant bed and the way an ant bed works, that's the way a communist system works.
A completely collective, is that what you're saying?
A complete collective is their goal. But even there, take note of this. The richest man in Cuba was Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
So all of it to the top, to the actual leaders of the revolution.
Yeah. And they lived a tremendous lifestyle. And one of this is not provable, but I have seen it on a History Channel documentary. When Stalin was getting ready to have another purge in the early 50s, he invited Brezhnev, Kosygin, Khrushchev, and all of them out to the country.
Zhukov.
Yeah. And Khrushchev was the hero of Stalingrad.
Yeah.
He was the guy that pulled it out. So they feared him so much, they decided they better take him out before he takes them out. And the story is that he was poisoned.
Yeah, I was gonna say they found him dead in his room, and they were too afraid to do anything for 5 days. But then when they did decide to do anything about it, a new government
he was dying
immediately.
in the room, and they didn't do anything about it.
Okay, so I was wrong.
Now,
but
this is all, this is not documented history. This is coming from the people that tended him, and in other words, it's all. They would never put that in a history book.
Yeah, they'd be hanged for it. But
yeah,
it would make sense why they had that new government so quickly fall in place after the loss of the sole leader.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, Nikita Khrushchev was a lot less vicious man than Joseph Stalin.
And we are seeing the imperativeness of this story, and I really want to commend Mr. Teich for sharing this for the future generations. I've wanted to put this down, put it in the archives, so that the future prosperity of this country and the posterity that we will lead forward from our generation will know what had happened in Rhodesia, know about the communist plot, the conspiracy of the communist world order to subvert countries. And if we really want to look at slavery, if you really want to look at oppression, look at the communist countries. There is nobody that has done worse things. There's nobody that has created child slavery. There's nobody that's sex trafficked. There is nobody who has enslaved the people of Africa as a whole like communism.
And the secret to their success is the use of useful idiots.
So the best way for us to prevent communism is to learn about it.
That's their words, by the way. They needed
gullible revolutionaries. That's what Lennon said. I Googled it. Gullible revolutionaries.
So if you don't want to be a gullible revolutionary, take Mr. Teich's words seriously. This is not just coming from a history book that you are reading because somebody in the school board was paid off to present it to you and then proceed to give their buddies who gave them a payout a mass sum of taxpayer dollars for a very, what they consider progressive, but is actually cultural Marxism in the history class and math classes anymore. Learn for yourselves, read for yourselves, better yourselves, because the day is coming, and we're not here to call it a grand schematic, but there is a point in every nation's history where we face a common demon. And just as Ann had said to you, Mr. Teich, it's coming for you too. So we want to thank our viewers today. We want to thank Mr. Teich for joining us. Join us next week where we will have more fun lectures, more fun discussions. Come back at you next Tuesday.
Not as depressing ones.
God bless. Stay cool.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County. Joco Community Radio.
Let's be honest. Wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. If you carry a wheelchair in your car to take care of a loved one, you know how hard it is getting that clunky, old-style wheelchair in and out of your car. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. At 13 pounds, it's the world's lightest wheelchair. It folds in seconds and fits neatly in your trunk, backseat, or closet, so you can take it everywhere. And it's only available right here. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value, yours free. The Feather Chair. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-82